Hello, it's Kim,
And Polly.
and today we're going to have a rummage around in quite a challenging subject,
Yeah.
the role of chemotherapy. Um, yeah, I'm not. Why do we want to do this, Polly? We want to do it because it's the kind of conversation we wish we.
Well, for me particularly, I wished I'd had an exploratory conversation about chemotherapy before I received it.
Right.
And to be honest, I'd never really thought about it. It's a bit strange that I hadn't, but I hadn't really thought about. I just heard about it. It's what you have when you have cancer. You
So
get
yes.
chemotherapy,
So
and that
why
was a
would
bit
one
like,
do it? I mean, see, Kevin and I had looked into it, because we both, he practices as a doctor, I practice as a herbalist, so it's something that comes across our radar in
yeah.
our research, in our patients.
Did you and he have a conversation about it? Sort of.
Well, we would often read quite a lot of stuff that looked at all the pros and cons and a lot of the counter arguments, because you're seeing the weighty damage that happens to people with cancer, and knowing that thing that doesn't get spoken about out in the big wide world, that when people end up with a cancer diagnosis, half of us will be dead within 2 years, and with or without chemo or complications, and half of us will go on to live beyond those 2 years. So we knew it's not cut and thrust that it's the cure all.
Yeah.
So there was a conversation, or the music. I can remember not long before Kevin got ill, he said, I wonder what either of us would do if we had cancer. Would we do chemotherapy? And also that knowing that most doctors do often sidle off and don't
Yes.
involve themselves
Yes.
in chemotherapy.
I've
So
noticed that.
yeah, so that's where we were.
Mm.
But I guess when after, because he had an operation for his cancer and then went to see the oncologist, and at that very first strange consultation, the registrar was sweet. She did all the initial stuff, then the top honcho came in, and it was 40 minutes. And if this is a consultant talking to a doctor, so it's not as if there was a level of naivety in
No,
the room.
no.
She spent that whole 40 minutes graphically going through the chemo drugs and all the side effects, and actually quite excited,
It was
but it was
dramatic.
dramatic,
Yeah.
but with no connectivity that this was someone's human body, this was someone's life,
She was
impacting on
giving
the
the kind of heads up, but at the same time not, because she wasn't talking to him as a person, was she? She was just kind of,
when it was sort of medical head stuff. And
yeah,
I was sitting, Kevin was beside me
yeah,
like this, and the consultant was further along, and the registrar was like opposite, like where the viewers would be. And I can remember sort of looking up, and this poor registrar had her eyes were on stalks, and then I just remember just sort of turning myself in, going, oh, this is unbearable. And so we came out of that consultation going, nah, no, that doesn't really sound like something anyone would want to go through, um, and let alone then having your own medical knowledge to go, well, that's really
yeah, yeah,
heavy
yeah,
journey.
yeah.
And there was nothing engaging on a human level, that there was healing or
No,
care.
no.
So anyway, he refused it in the initial thing, but then his cancer galloped ahead, and we had young children, so he made his choice. And I think we all make our absolute individual choice at the point of time that we're in, that he would go forth and do it. And it was, looking back, as can see, he really girded his loins
To face it.
to face it. And the chemo program that he had, we had to travel an hour at least from home down to the hospital every 3 weeks or so. He'd had intravenous chemo, and then there was some tablets for a few days. And that first chemo session is horrifying. It's horrifying because you get the nurses come up and they check and sort of triple check, that it's you, and do you want to sign the consent forms? And I think, I can remember that sort of chill going through me at one point. Go, actually, there is a choice here. And there was
Yes.
almost like there's a pause when they asked, you do understand what you're agreeing to, and you do realise you can refuse at this point. So there's just that little glimmer whilst you're sitting on the chemo wards, but of course then, really you've committed
Yeah. Well, you've
that.
already taken the step, haven't you, to kind of start off on it, really,
Yeah,
and it's very hard then to make a decision to suddenly jump sideways.
yeah. And it was what he was going to do.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that, and then I think for me, just sitting there, and for him, it's like this. It's horrifying. I mean, anyone who's been in a chemo ward or experienced it, personally or as someone standing alongside you, just do know it's a whole nother parallel universe going on,
Mm.
and it's the cognitive dissonance really is that something very brutal and chilling and heavy, toxic is going in, and you're feeling shit because you're
Yeah.
ill anyway.
Yeah.
And that desire, I think probably it is me as the healthy person as well, and, and the other people I spoke, other patients going through it as well. There's that desire to run
Mm.
because
Yeah.
you're being chemically
Well, you're being
poisoned.
poisoned. Yeah.
So it's complicated because as we said, which we didn't say, we're not pro or anti chemo in this. We just
No, it's just that case of if something it's a big thing, and so many people now experience it,
mm,
and yet there's no space to talk about it. Actually, not just your symptoms or what you had and everything, but to actually explore the deeper parts of it. That why am I doing this? What is it doing to me? Do I have choices here? And what are they? Are they real choices? And what are the consequences of having some choice? It's a I don't remember. It's interesting about the consent forms. Because I had AML, which is acute myeloid leukemia, which was a bit of a galloper. So in a couple of months from kind of starting to feel a bit poorly to being really, really ill. And so when I went to hospital, I had lots of things done, a Hickman line put in and various other things. And I don't remember ever being asked or sign a damn thing for any of this, because I remember being told, we're going to treat you. I went in on Christmas Eve to King's. I remember being told that on Boxing Day or the day after Boxing Day, they would start the full whammy of treatment. And it's going to be antibiotics and chemotherapy. And I just went, I'm really poorly here. I wasn't offered a choice. This is what we're going to do, is what I was told. And
yeah.
so later, I felt quite ambivalent about all of that, although I know that it saved my life at that point. Because I didn't feel that I had any options, and I wasn't being asked, and I hadn't bought the ticket for that journey.
No.
And I hadn't had a chance to explore. And there are lots of reasons why I didn't. But we're doing it now as people who've experienced some closeness with chemo and the ramifications around it, and how we feel about, for example, now I'm in a very different place. I mean, I was very grateful, is a very difficult word, for my chemotherapy. I mean, I can't describe some of the symptoms I had.
No, probably finds this, and
I mean, I had everything wrong with me.
Yeah.
I was like somebody with full-blown AIDS, if that helps. If you remember what it was like for people with full-blown AIDS, everything failed. And I had every side effect, fungal lung. I mean, lovely things, because they were trying to kill off all my white cells repeatedly in order that the leukemia cells would be killed off. So all those things are really horrendous and horrific at the same time. And then I know that if I hadn't had it, I would not be sitting here. And I find that really quite challenging to work with that.
It is.
I don't know where to put any of the feelings I have around it, really. So I think that's it.
And sometimes that is enough. That's the complexity of being an honest human being, that we, not just with chemotherapy, we have these it's not cut and dried. That was the right decision, that was the wrong decision.
It was what the decision was, and we're living with the consequences.
I mean, I think one of the things I know I've tried to talk to you about before. It's that, so having gone through as a, as the partner, as the
Yeah.
wife of someone with cancer, then having other friends who've had cancer and who've done different journeys, it make it's then of course it colours
Yeah.
what I think I may
Mm.
do if I should be in that situation. And I guess what it hones it down to for me is going, well, what are the things if I am seriously ill with cancer that are going to feed my days,
Yeah. Whoa.
feed the quality of my life. And one of the complete contrast to Kevin's journey was another very good friend, another herbalist actually, who died last year from
Mm.
cancer, very similar, ironically, very similar cancer to Kevin, another similar late diagnosis. And he elected not to have any treatment. I mean, they told him again that it would be palliative, as it would have been, as
Yes.
it was
Yes.
palliative for Kevin, i.e., it's just going to extend your days.
Mm.
But when I was able to have that conversation with him, because he really asked me about our family
Yeah.
experience, so he
Yeah.
understood it's not just that one person, it's the whole family, and I think that's a
Mm.
really conversation for us to have next.
Yes.
But and he told me, I don't want to spend my last months, weeks and months doing the circuit of hospital
Yeah.
appointments. And I said, absolutely, because for us, as a family, it was you're in this living, non-living. You're in this non-zone.
Mm.
You're not in between.
You really aren't in a living
You know,
or dead zone. You
no,
are in limbo.
you're in limbo. You're living between appointments,
Yeah.
or waiting between appointments, and it's not like you go, oh, I'm going to have the treatment. We're going to feel right, and then we can go out. And we can go and do these nice
And
things
life
that
can
are
be
normal.
better.
It's not like
No.
that. It's
No.
not like that.
It's
And
about how you cope with every thing that's happened to you each time, isn't it? It's
yeah,
coping
it's
strategies all
yeah,
the
and
time.
you never know with chemo. What session, what the different side effects, the
Mm.
rollout, which are, and we're not going to talk about those because it's just bloody hideous. So and again, I think the
Yeah.
choice. Another thing that goes through my head is like, well, who do you have around when, you know, what support measures do you
Mm.
have and not have, and how does that function for different, for different people, different family circumstances? So, because it takes a lot of time and energy, challenging time and energy.
Yeah. And it's quite interesting that thing about choices as well, because I know that with lots of cancers, I mean, mine was slightly different in that they're
Mm,
preparing you all the time for. I was being prepared for a bone marrow transplant. That's another story. So mine was on that trajectory. But for a
mm,
lot of people, there are times when you go in and this has worked, this hasn't worked. We can go
mm,
more, or we
mm,
can't do more, or we can do this
mm,
dose or that. And choices are endlessly being thrown at you about whether you take the next
mm,
step. So you might have quite a gap, and then something comes back, or something hasn't worked, or you've got more symptoms, and then they're
mm.
offering it to you again. And then so that choice is needed to be made again and again for a lot of people with cancer.
But it's yeah,
And
and
that's hard, isn't it?
it
Because
is hard.
each time you've got all that experience of how you felt, but the pressure's on you because it's almost like you've started this, so you must finish
Yeah,
it. There's
yes,
that,
that's
isn't there? You've
you're
stepped on, and you're like,
yeah,
how do you get off
you're
this?
definitely on the sort of I don't know what the factory conveyor belt.
Yeah,
Um, which is really yeah.
and that's that whole the whole thing about that is it's all totally depowering.
Mm,
And there's
mm,
actually the fact that you on it, you almost like you shut up because you're on it because there's no dialogue because that's what you're on. There's the opportunities to explore how you might feel about living longer but not better.
mm,
And I know now, and I've actually put it in my documentation for end of life. My advanced
mm,
decision has a whole paragraph about whatever, any kind of
mm,
cancer that I get. I'm not having any chemotherapy. I don't want to be persuaded to have
mm,
chemotherapy or blackmailed into it
mm.
by anybody. That you must do this for us,
And that happens.
and we know that
Mm,
happens. And I don't want to do it because I want that last bit, whatever it happens to be free from nausea and all the other things that make your life so poor in
yeah,
quality.
You see, yes, you see, and that's why my other friend is a shining, well, not a shining, but a shining example,
Yeah.
because he knew the things that he really enjoyed were like his home life and his garden and his family and his cats, and
Mm.
he knew that that's what kept him calm
Yeah.
and connected to nature
Yeah.
and to his own resources. But of course, once you're on that factory conveyor belt of the hospital system, I
Well,
think I think for most
yeah.
people that goes right out the wind.
Again, it's split away
Well,
from you.
you're
You're
yes,
divided.
you are. You are absolutely divided,
Yeah.
and I'm the kind of person. I mean, some people are fine through that system, but I'm the kind of person who thrives on human connection and
Mm.
engagements. And I think, as was Kevin, and I think it was quite an eye opener watching. Or, I was an observer for most of the time in those hospital consultations. That the communication was on a certain level,
Yeah.
but there wasn't actually that human
No.
to human dialogue, which I guess was really peculiar for me and Kevin, because
You're so used to, that's how you were with
that's
your
that's
as
how I
practitioners as
yeah
well.
he operates as an integrated physician. I operate on that
Yeah.
level as well, so that very engaged, supportive,
Mm.
connective level. So it was I think it makes me feel panicky, to be
Well,
in that, but
it's fearful. It's a
it's
frightening place to be in, where people are not looking at you and seeing you, but they've separated themselves for
mm,
whatever reason and
mm,
not
mm,
responding
mm,
to you. So
mm.
with a human warmth
Yeah, I
in
mean,
that.
I
I know
guess
there's reasons why
yeah,
people don't. It's not a blame game we're
no,
playing
no.
here. It's a kind of exploration of the challenges,
Or is it?
um,
Yeah.
and how we can get our heads around the things that are asked of us a lot of the time.
Well, I guess it's, I know in our other talks we've done stunts, the birthing and the being very ill and the dying bit,
Mm.
it's the real flesh and blood of being human,
Yeah,
isn't it? It's
they're the bits that really matter,
the
aren't
bits
they?
that really matter. So if something utterly significant is happening to us when we're in these threshold moments, incredibly vulnerable moments, do we want to be met?
Mm.
Do we want our humanness to be met fully, or do we just want it to be a bureaucratic tick box
Patient number.
system?
Yeah.
And I guess you and I, we're just putting a shout out to the never doubt the value of going through something with all your human faculties, engaged,
Mm.
met, rather, because I think that's the thing. Once there's a conflict, how
Yeah.
can it be if you're? I had a kind of very strong image, of in the chemo wards of, or just not image, actually an understanding that there was an utter conflict going on.
Mm.
That the patients are sitting there having to be passive whilst this chemical
Yeah.
agent goes in, which makes you feel pretty counter to what's good about life,
Because it's a
100%.
dangerous drug. They're putting a
Yeah,
toxin. They're
yeah.
putting into you.
And all your animal energy is
Mm.
wanting to get up and run and
Yeah.
heal and not be in an institutionalized
Mm.
experience, but you're having to endure it. So to my mind, I just saw that huge tension.
Yeah.
So if there's tension, how can the body and our lives find
Mm.
ease and the love and
Well, how can you be receptive to healing if you're just locked in fear and
mm,
tension all the time? I
mm,
mean, healing is a
mm,
complex thing, isn't it?
mm,
And it involves you
mm.
being open to it.
Yes, and it's not. There was some really lovely, as there's some really lovely people in health.
Yeah,
The health system
of
is
course,
populated by
like
human
human
beings, which
beings.
some are wonderful and some are
Yeah.
just, not so nice. And that's institutions everywhere, isn't it? So, or people everywhere.
But the people, and I remember because all my treatment was in hospital as an inpatient, in isolation.
Yeah.
I didn't see anybody apart from nurses for quite long
Mm,
periods coming to do obs. And when they gave me the treatment, I wasn't with anybody else for the
mm,
treatment. So it was really kind of, you really left on your own with
mm,
it. really definitely. And somebody taught me visualization, to go, this chemo is coming into my veins, is doing me good, and it's healing, and it's this and the other. Because I had one that was bright blue, and that really freaked me out when I saw that going, because that is the wrong colour for human beings to be putting inside themselves. It just felt, I mean, even the look of it was scary.
Yeah.
And so, to have nobody with you to as an inpatient to hold your hand through any of that, and to listen, or to just kind of mop up your tears, it's in extreme. I mean, people were really suffering in those wards because of that. Again, the opportunity to be human was cut off from you. You had no agency. You couldn't make yourself a cup of tea. I mean, I did take myself to the toilet, but then that was criticised because I used to do things like faint on the way back. At times, so you didn't see anybody. You didn't have any human qualities. You'd shut up in this place in the sky where nobody comes.
No, it's hard. It's a chemical warfare against ourselves, and so
you do endure it. You said the word endure.
You endure it. You endure. I think Kevin endured it, and I had to endure it. Had to endure the witness, and hold the rest of the family at the same time. And
you were asking lots of questions, I should imagine, all the time, because they.
Well, that
well,
they were young.
They weren't able.
They weren't able.
Yeah. We're still not understanding.
But there's not. That's So when you're in the hospital, you've got that isolation story. I mean, for us, it was that toing and froing, and then you come back and you just don't know what's going to happen from that evening. And there's we had the list of side effects from the consultant, but actually a whole heap of other things happen as well. And
some very odd things to happen that
no one, you can't be prepared. And it leaves you on tenterhooks, I think. I think maybe that's part of another story of being the partner of someone who's very ill, is that vigilance, that
the watching and
waiting, and how you navigate that. You don't, your partner doesn't only watch like a hawk, but it's even the simple act. Like if you're lying asleep at night, it was like when the children are young. My ear was open. It's like, is this person in trouble beside me? And you kind of almost sort of pick up on the turbulence of their dream state as well. And so yes, it's more than
it does have a real knock-on effect to everybody. And I remember thinking later that the different nurses that gave me my chemo, there was one who certainly when she gave me my chemo, and she also used to give me intravenous antibiotics, and every time she gave me antibiotics I could throw up in seconds of her giving me the dose. And she was so apologetic, and she used to pat me and hold my hand, and she was the nurse I longed for coming on duty, because she saw me and she didn't want to be hurting me, harming me, causing me pain or discomfort. But most of the time people aren't able to do that. They have to switch off in order to do it's a hard thing.
They do, and
it's a really hard thing to be doing.
It's a brutalising thing. And actually you reminded me, maybe because that's one of our other key things, is that when someone is sick, and especially with cancer, it's not just that one, not the individual, because repeating myself probably, the pressure on that person, but everyone's involved in that older knowing that when in cultures where one person's sick, the rest of the community knows that there's a sickness that needs tending for all of them to attend to. And you just maybe end on this note, but when you go through the cancer journey, and I became acutely aware of the people who the angels, so whether it's the friends who just turned up and picked the kids up to and from school, or made the meals, or I was thinking, of an ex oncology nurse. She saw what was going on. So on one level, she couldn't necessarily engage with it fully because her husband had died from leukemia very quickly, in intensive care. But she was able to speak honestly to me, because she could read the rooms, as it were, of where our story was heading. And actually her calm connection and communication was utterly useful, more useful than the you know, the list of symptoms that the oncologist left. She was able.
But she was a human being who was relating to you, wasn't she?
Yeah.
And in a normal way, and being truthful.
Yes.
Actually,
being truthful and being able to name the fact without any fears of watching your back, just going, yeah, this is not progressing in a good direction. I mean, she didn't say it as overtly as that, but you know, she's also just saying basically to me as a good friend, you know, gird your loins for the journey ahead.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think we might have to come back to this. There's more to unpick.
So you know, it's an interesting conversation. We hopefully, because again, it's just putting thoughts out there and to know that there's agency to be had. And I think what Polly and I, to reiterate, you know, there's no right or wrong of what any of us choose to do in those moments. It's the fact that we would have liked to explore these things a bit more, had that information to hand as we were starting our journeys in this. And also to know, I think, is when we see people heading off with that, I was going to say gullible supposition.
Yeah, okay, sorry about that.
No, don't worry.
I think we need to come to an end with it. But
yeah, no.
The other one was really interesting that we didn't bring up. You were saying how it affects a family, and you were the witness and the support and all the other stuff you were with Kevin, and suffering alongside him, and how I was actually really glad that I didn't have a partner.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't deal with having to deal with somebody else. Yeah. When I would have children, that was bad enough. But
see, and that ties in with the dying thing as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I think it's
a really interesting conversation to have. Whether we talk about to do with chemo, just to do with illness.
Yeah. You know, that part of Kevin that probably got a bit annoyed that, you know, he knew what was going on, I knew what was going on, and he knew that I was witnessing the fact that he was dying. But of course he felt out of, you know, that unspoken conversation, you know. Yeah, so just winding up really of exploring the conversations for ourselves and knowing that we've witnessed or been party to others innocently, gullibly, naively, whatever, stepping onto that factory conveyor belt and feeling, you know, hopeless that we can't have that conversation. Go, actually, whoa, stop a minute, and just, there are things you can explore.
There's nothing else in the world where you do such a major thing and not invest time, effort, and in exploring the options and the consequences of the options. You would do research.
Yeah, I mean, you do more research for buying a car, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Some people.
And you would have people who you could talk to, some of whom were trying to sell you the car, but some who could be totally independent. And that's the thing, that having somebody that you can bash things out with. Yes, in a really honest way.
And I think that's the really important thing we need to come back to, is also all the other people who have got time and energy and money invested in the cancer market. So we're not we're interested in the human agenda conversation. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
And see you again.